Jaq Draco was a Radical Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus who was believed to have been active during the early years of M40 or M41. Draco himself was quite possibly one of the most infamous and notorious Inquisitors to ever exist, whose reported exploits are as equally impressive as they are outlandish. Not only did Draco succeed in infiltrating the legendary Black Library of the Eldari and subsequently abscond with the Book of Ranadandra, but he also commandeered a Reaver-class Titan, withstood demonic possession, and even obtained an audience with none other than the Emperor himself. This latter event would come about due to Draco uncovering a conspiracy surrounding the mysterious extremist organization known as the Ordo Hydra, who sought to sacrifice the Emperor's long-lost children, the Sensei, in order to tether and enslave all of humanity to a warp entity known simply as the Hydra, so as to, somewhat paradoxically, render humanity immune to the predations of chaos. This discovery, however, would result in Draco and his retinue, Melindy, a Kalidas assassin who also served as Draco's consort and lover, a squat engineer known simply as Grim, and a navigator named Vitali Google being declared as renegades and traitors, as the tendrils of the Ordo Hydra had managed to worm their way into the highest positions of authority within the Inquisition itself. Melindy and Google would both eventually perish, with the latter falling prey to a demon of Slanesh, while the former would be slain by the Eldari Phoenix Lord Jane Zar on the very outskirts of the Black Library. In time, the Inquisitor's retinue would expand to include Lexandra de Arquebus, a captain of the Imperial Fist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, who would later fall victim to demonic possession before being subsequently exorcised by Draco, and a thief named Raquel Kaczynski, who Draco intended to use as a vessel to facilitate Melindy's rebirth. After a series of misadventures which saw them travelling from planet to planet and coming into conflict with various foes, including the aforementioned Eldari, Traitor Legion Astartes, and even the Tyrannids, Draco and his entourage would finally reach a location within the Webway in where he could enact his plan to resurrect his fallen lover. However, once Melindy's soul was implanted into Raquel's body, the resulting hybrid entity, confused, scared, and in pain, would fly into a berserk rage, launching herself at Draco, Lexandra, and Grim, believing each of them to be the Phoenix Lord that had slain her just a few weeks prior. This would result in Melindy severely mauling her former lover, effortlessly snapping his arm at the elbow with a single open palm strike, before then turning her attention to Lexandro, disabling the unarmored Space Marine with a well-aimed blast from a digiweapon. Melindy would then flee into the bowels of the Webway, leaving Draco distraught and heartbroken, unable to cope with the loss of his beloved for a second time. In his grief, Draco began spouting various curses and blasphemies against the Emperor, prompting Lexandro, believing that the Inquisitor was succumbing to demonic influence, to execute him with a bolt round to the face, much to Grim's shock and dismay. However, because his death occurred within the depths of the Webway network, Draco's spirit was prevented from dissipating into the warp, and was instead bound to the very structure of the Webway itself, dooming his spirit to endlessly wander its corridors for all of eternity. But while Jaq Draco's various escapades are indeed well documented, their sheer outlandishness has led many Imperial scholars to not only question their veracity and authenticity, but there are even doubts as to whether or not the Inquisitor himself ever truly existed. So is there any way to determine the truth regarding the story of Jaq Draco? One of the more confusing aspects of Draco's story is in regards to when exactly it took place. According to the original renditions of the novels Inquisitor, Harlequin, and Chaos Child, Draco's adventures first began in the year 40,273, or 273 M41 for short. However, this would in itself be contradicted, if not outright retconned, by an in-universe editorial which was added to the 2002 reprint of Harlequin. This editorial, which took the form of a report penned by an adept of the Adeptus Mechanicus named Aurelius Foe and dated 091 M41, states that the book in question, the manuscript for which Foe claims to have found stashed away between a pair of neglected sewage pipes, had remained undisturbed for at least 700 years, if not longer. Assuming that Foe's initial estimations are correct, this would mean that the events of Harlequin had been retconned to instead take place around 391 M40, meaning that Draco's adventures, as per the reprint of Inquisitor, now renamed to simply Draco, first began circa 291 M40. Now, regardless as to which date, if any, is accurate, both would continue to imply that Draco's adventures are indeed fictitious, due to the events of Chaos Child featuring one Xenos race in particular, the Tyranids. Officially, as detailed within various iterations of the Tyranid Codex, the Imperium made first contact with the Tyranids during 741 M41 upon the world of Tyran. If the accounts of Draco's various escapades are indeed accurate, then this would mean that the Inquisitor would have encountered Tyranids and known the race by name roughly 1300 years prior to them being first encountered by the Imperium in any official capacity. As a result, this would appear to cast further doubt over the authenticity of Draco's story. What also supports the idea of Jaq Draco being an entirely fictional character comes from an in-universe editorial that was added to the 2002 reprint of Draco. According to an Imperial archivist known simply as R, who had been researching the events of the novel at the behest of their inquisitorial employer, they could find no evidence to support the notion of Jaq Draco ever existing, as shown with the following quote.
I have been unable to acquire any evidence of the existence of an Inquisitor of our order by the name of Jaq Draco. Indeed, my researches have led me to believe that none of the orders have any record of such personage. However, I have not been permitted access to their most hidden archives, and I cannot therefore offer a definitive answer as to his non-existence.
Now, by R's own admission, it's entirely possible that any records regarding Jaq Draco, assuming that he was indeed a real person, could have been effectively classified due in part to his supposed involvement in the Hydra conspiracy, which, as mentioned earlier, was said to have infiltrated the uppermost echelons of the Inquisition itself. Because of this, it's not unreasonable to assume that Draco could very well have existed, with the records of his various exploits being kept under lock and key, or simply denounced as fabrications and falsehoods in order to keep the truth regarding any existence of corruption within the Inquisition itself suppressed. After all, one could argue that the best place to hide something as monumental as the Hydra conspiracy would be in plain sight, which in turn would result in the common consensus being to denounce it as little more than an outlandish story, one which is entirely lacking in credibility. Indeed, such a consensus appears to have already been met by many throughout the Imperium, for as detailed within the novel Sinner's Bounty, Cal Jericho, a bounty hunter from the hive world of Necromunda, would himself make reference to the idea of Jaq Draco being an entirely fictional character, as shown with the following passage.
He'd heard the stories. Most people had. His nursemaid had told him all about the battles with the dark arbitrators of Spoil Shadow and the crusade into the yearning deeps. But he'd never thought of Cowl as being real. He was just a name in a story, like Jaq Draco or the Vampire King of Trazior.
Despite this, however, there is still plenty of evidence which not only suggests that Draco was indeed a real person, but that his various adventures did in fact take place. The most notable of which comes from the novel Atlas Infernal. During his time within the Black Library as a captive of the Eldari, Inquisitor Bronislav Chevak of the Ordo Xenos would encounter, to his surprise, another human, one whose appearance was surprisingly close to that of Jaq Draco, as detailed with the following passage.
He once even saw a human, a gunmetal grey-haired member of some Illuminati or Xenos sect, entrusted like the Inquisitor had been with the Craftworld's secrets. As the two men looked at one another, the ponytailed visitor gave what the aged Chevak assumed to be grim pity, with his spiky, furrowed brow and steely eyes. That was the day Chevak started talking the lunacy of escape.
While more recent interpretations of Jaq Draco depict him as being bald, he was commonly portrayed in older works, such as within the original artworks for Inquisitor and Chaos Child, as having hair that is indeed gunmetal grey in colour. Not only this, but Draco's hair in this artwork also appears to be slicked back, possibly alluding to it being tied up in a ponytail, much like the hair of the man seen by Inquisitor Qipeng. In addition, Draco, after being manipulated into becoming an unwitting member of the organization, would have the insignia of the Ordo Hydra tattooed upon his face, a marking that Qipeng would have most certainly viewed as belonging to some sort of Illuminati sect, especially given that the Ordo Hydra were themselves described as being an offshoot of the actual Illuminati. As such, it seems fairly likely that the man Qipeng encountered whilst in captivity was indeed Jaq Draco, after the latter had succeeded in infiltrating the Black Library. What also supports the idea that Jaq Draco had actually existed, albeit fairly loosely, is that Draco has an entry within the book, the Inquisition Encyclopedia. While this book mentions how Draco was not only a Radical Inquisitor, but had also been declared a renegade, there is no suggestion whatsoever alluding to him or his followers being in any way, shape or form fictitious. But regardless as to whether he was a real man or a fictional character, few can deny that the stories of Jaq Draco will continue to live on in infamy, even if some believe that such works should be destroyed for their seemingly heretical content. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.